Good morning, everyone. This is your Florida State President, Christine Citrano, and I want to welcome all of you this morning for our virtual event, this webinar, which I'm so thrilled to be bringing you. We have Dr. Brad O'Connor, who is the Chief Economist for Florida Realtors. And he's going to be talking to us today about the market, what's going on, perhaps how hard COVID-19 has affected the real estate market, and also going to be providing us with some tips and some skills on how to hone in on the Florida Realtor website to pull stats on your particular marketplace, which I think when you really bring it all down to that fine level, that's what we all need. There will be a question and answer session towards the end of this time period. If you look towards the bottom of your screen, you will see right next to the participants, you will see a Q&A area, and that is where you will want to post in any questions that you have, which again we will be doing towards the end of the webinar, so approximately 30 minutes or so. So as the head of research of the research department, Dr. O'Connor oversees the production of the association's widely cited monthly housing market statistics, as well as numerous other economic and statistical research projects. So I guess it's fair to say you're a numbers junkie. Is that right, Mr. O'Connor? Dr. O'Connor? Yes. Anyway, with no further ado, I am going to turn the platform over to Dr. O'Connor. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Christine. It's really good to be with all of you today. I hope the weather is nice where all of you are. That's something I've come to appreciate a little more now that I'm trapped inside all the time, is getting out there. I'm getting out. As an economist, I usually like to live in a cave and work on my models and stuff. And now I'm learning to appreciate the outdoors a little more. I'm going to pull up a presentation I did prepare for today, so bear with me. Then I'm gonna share my screen. That should have worked. All right, so I wanted to start off by going over kind of where the market was at before all of this started to happen, you know, and we didn't really, the story of coronavirus was around in January and February, but it really wasn't until the market started to fall apart in the last week of February, the stock market, that a lot of people really started to take notice. So I really wanted to kind of go over what our housing market did last year, and in the first couple months of this year moving into March. And what you'll see here in this chart, at Florida Realtors, we compile statewide and local monthly market statistics from MLS feeds from every MLS in the state. That's in partnership with all of the local realtor associations in our state. And we divide, because all the MLSs have different property types, we've really had to narrow it down to 3 main property types. So we focus on single family homes, condos and townhouses, essentially all of the multifamily types of properties, and then mobile and manufactured housing. And then we combine them all together in a gray category called all residential types. Those are the four types we report on, and you can see that just overall, all residential types, we were up. Single family homes last year up almost 6% to close to 300,000 sales. That's MLS only, we're not even counting off MLS sales. And then condos and townhouses actually down almost a percentage point, but still a substantial number of sales and outweighed by single family homes. So great year for sales. Median sale price at the same time, if you look at year over year, which is usually how I compare monthly statistics, I don't like to do it month to month because of seasonality being so prevalent. You can see the seasonality in our data right here, where the median sale price peaks in the summer and then kind of stays flat, and then it rises again the first half of the year, pretty much every year. So looking at year over year, however, we can go back to 2011, right when we were hitting bottom, and draw a straight line year over year all the way to the top. And I don't think we've had a single month, at least for single family homes, where the median sale price has been down year over year in any month. So that's hundreds of months span where we didn't have a drop. And technically, I don't believe we've still had, we haven't had that drop yet either. So into this year. So really strong sales price growth, although not as strong as more recent years that we've seen, where we were in the upper single digits. We were in the lower single digits for single family homes for 2019. Our median sale price for the year was $264,000. That's only up 3.7% from 2018. For condos and townhouses, around the same kind of growth. We saw 3.8% growth up to $192,000 for the annual median in that category. What's important, however, and what really drove all those sales, those large sales increases we saw, was that while prices were going up, and this is the same chart I just showed you, but it's superimposed on the top so that I can put another chart on the bottom here. This is an estimated monthly mortgage payment for the typical or median priced home. And you can see that even though prices were going up, the amount you would pay a month for that median priced home was actually going down. So for the median priced home in 2019, you actually paid less per month if you could secure a mortgage than you would have in 2018. So in a sense, in the way that a financed buyer is going to purchase a home and look at it, it was actually cheaper to buy a home last year than it was the year before that. Same thing happened on the condo side. And all of this activity was driven, I'm the first to admit, I didn't see it coming. It wasn't in my forecast last year for interest rates to fall out of the sky in the first couple of months of 2019 and do what they did. But that's what happens with interest rates last year. And we were really, this is Freddie Mac's data where they survey the average 30-year fixed mortgage rate every week, going all the way back to 1971 or 72. And we've never been lower really in terms of our mortgage rates than we have been right now. We're getting really close to zero. That's actually not an issue right now. I do like to point out that we've been really lucky as an industry, since the 80s. When we really peaked, we've been able to count on and rely on interest rates that over time have been tending to drop. There's a pretty straight line there that you can trace through that time series. That's always been beneficial to our market. Think about, as a first-time home buyer, you get your first home, you lock in a rate, and after a few years, your family starts to outgrow your home. Well, you could almost always count on, if you wanted to upsize, you could almost always count on there being a lower interest rate there waiting for you when you wanted to upsize. We're going to get to a point where that's not there anymore. We're not quite there yet, but that is coming at some point. Definitely not in the next, in the next couple of years, not an issue, but there's really been 3 points in the last business cycle where we've been as low as we are right now in terms of interest rates. One was towards the end of 2013, which along with 2015 was one of our best sales years of the entire cycle in terms of growth. And towards the end of 2016 as well, we touched it briefly. But it's really been, we've had some low rates. Now the interest rates are tied to the 10-year Treasury bond. Why the 10-year and not the 30-year? Because mortgages, even though they are for 30 years, or the basic mortgage for 30 years that most home buyers use, those don't live for 30 years very often because we either refi or we sell our house well before we're in it for 30 years. So that's why it's tied more closely to the 10-year Treasury rate. But there's always a spread between those two rates. The 10-year Treasury is backed by the full power of the federal government. whereas mortgages have some risk associated with them. So that's why they yield more for investors who buy your mortgage in the secondary market. But there's always some sort of spread between the two. I didn't throw it in here, but they almost mirror each other over the entire history of this data series. But that spread has widened in the last couple of months. So we've been watching the 10-year Treasury rate fall like hawks, and yet we haven't really seen a huge corresponding response, because we should technically be seeing interest rates for a 30-year mortgage down in the sub 3 at some of the 10-year Treasury rates we've been seeing. So the reason for that is because the risk spread has gotten a little bit bigger between the two. And also their refi demand on the 15-year mortgage, if you're looking at that, has really pushed that gap up too, because we should be seeing 15-year rates very, very low, historically low. But that's really the story of last year was interest rates. You'll remember that we started 2019 in kind of a little bit of an economic tizzy to begin with. If you remember, at the end of 2018, we actually had a temporary spike in interest rates. They were up near 5 in late fall and going into winter. And around that time in December, the stock market started to fluctuate pretty wildly. I mean, now it would be like, we wouldn't even notice it today, the way the stock market's moving now. But a little over a year ago, we saw a lot of movement. There was a couple big drops there, a lot of uncertainty. And not only that, but after that happened, we were essentially moving into, if you remember, the federal government shutdown, where we had the longest shutdown we've ever had. So in early 2019. So there was so much uncertainty and a lot of economic and political upheaval, relatively speaking, that started our year out. But at that same time, towards the end of December and into January, February, March, April, that interest rate was taking its nosedive, and that really drove the market. The spring buying season was incredibly good, as was the rest of the year. Even the tail end of the year, some of the biggest numbers we've ever seen in closed sales for single family homes in December. I think we were up about 22% year over year at the end of 2019. So great year for sales, 2019, good year for house price appreciation. Our dollar volume as a result really took off. For the first time ever, we had over $100 billion worth of MLS sales of single family homes. That's up 8.3% over the year before. And for condos and townhouses in 2019, 31.6 billion. So even though sales were down, the prices pushed this over the top, and we had a positive gain in dollar volume for condos and townhouses, over 31 billion. So what's happened so far this year? Well, this year, and I've divided this table, and on the left side is the single family stats, and on the right side is condos and townhouses by month, and then year to date. Year to date, we're up 10% single family home closed sales, and a little over 9% on condos and townhouses. But you know, that's the first quarter for the year. The second quarter is going to be a completely different animal. A lot of people actually were surprised that we had positive sales for March, considering all the shenanigans began, you know, in late February. But as all of you are well aware, the closings that we saw last month were largely predetermined in January and February when they went under contract. So just to look, this is March's stats. I use these maps quite often if you've ever seen me speak before. I'll use the bubble size or the circle size to show a county's number of sales. So the bigger the bubble, the more sales there were in that county in March. But then the color and the percentage tell you, well, how is that different from what it was in the same month a year ago? And if it's a bluer hue, if it's a bluer hue, that means it went down. If it's a grayish hue, that means it's pretty flat. Orange hues are growth. So where did we see closed sales in March? pretty much everywhere. Although notably, they were fairly flat in South Florida and Central Florida as well, and in Pinellas County over here. But for the most part, most of the states saw a lot of sales growth and closed sales. Look at St. Johns County up near Jacksonville, and then the Treasure Coast over here on the east, and the southwest part of Florida, the Naples and Fort Myers, Cape Coral areas, all really strong sales. Excuse me. And then over in the Pensacola area too, we really were seeing our seasons take off. It's really, it hurts that much more to know what a great year we were lined up to have going into this. But, you know, I think we can salvage a lot of this depending on how things go. The median sale price of closed existing home sales, again, actually we've seen a pickup in terms of the pace of price growth compared to what we saw overall for 2019. And that's only accelerated as interest rates have done better. But really, you know, the high single-digit percentage growth here in the first 3 months of the year, and then even exceeding that for condos and townhouses in March. And again, dollar volume, really strong January. Again, we are comparing to January of 2019, where we were the government shutdown and whatnot. So part of that is that we had a really good January this year, and part of it is that January was not so hot last year. And here for March, again, a 16% growth in dollar volume. This might be the last time we see positive dollar volume for a couple months at least. So fortunately, I guess we've built up our coffers a little bit. But so how is this going to play out moving in? We do need to continue to pay attention to active inventory. We've been suffering from a shortage of inventory for 4 or 5 years now, honestly. And you can see right away one big difference between this cycle and where we're at, assuming that it's coming to an end and we're going in recession. Well, the end of this cycle is much different than the end of last cycle for one major reason being that our inventory is so much lower. In fact, again, as I said, we've been characterizing it as a shortage for a while now. End of 2019, the number of active listings of single family homes down over 11% at about 3.4 months supply of inventory. Compared to like, what was it, 15 or higher actually month supply of inventory at the end of the last cycle. Condos and townhouses, a little bit more of a balanced supply of inventory at 5.2 months supply, and down almost 10% in terms of number of listings compared to the end of 2018. So what's driving the inventory shortage? Continues to be largely more of the affordable end of the pricing spectrum, where we're seeing a lot of the shortage issues. There are many, you know, luxury markets around the state and upper tier markets where the market is more balanced on the single family home side, and it's really just the, you know, anything from the median price on down below that where we're really having trouble finding homes. We've got millennials reaching, you know, I think half of millennials are now in their 30s. And what we're calling millennials now are actually the generation after them, which is annoying both of those generations. But you know, millennials, peak millennials, we're getting there, and they want to buy homes. I know my personal experience, and I've found this with a lot of millennials. I'm not a millennial, but I'm a late Gen Xer. With millennial tendencies occasionally. For me, it was as soon as I started having kids, I no longer wanted to live in the city like they did on Friends and Seinfeld. I wanted to get up to the suburbs as soon as I had those kids, because it's a pain in the butt to get groceries in your house if you can't park in your garage. And so I yearned for my suburban upbringing. As soon as I had to tackle hauling children around. That's happening with the millennials. Also, interestingly, if you look at some of NAR's research, for the same reason, they're looking for space for their pets. And I had pet allergies growing up, so I don't hate pets. I just didn't have them. So it's not something I considered, and the NAR did some research, and in fact, pet decisions are driving millennial moves to the suburbs, possibly more than childcare and child rearing decisions. So. Looking at the inventory shortage, again, we want to find homes for these first-time home buyers. Well, in the last cycle, you can clearly see the peak from last cycle. I'm going to throw in a little line here that kind of approximates our population growth rate over those years. It's been slower since the end of last cycle, so that's why there's a little bit of a kink in it. If you look, this is just a rough analysis here. It's not that scientific, but just looking at all that excess housing that we built. We obviously overbuilt. And had way too much supply, and it seemed like we would never get rid of it. Those were some slow years from 2007 on to 2013, and that we don't often care to think back about. But we had essentially absorbed all of that surplus by 2012, 2013, and ever since then. We've actually been underbuilding. So now we're in the opposite situation coming into the end of this cycle than we were last time. And that's a really key factor. I mean, you can see kind of the same thing going on in the condos and townhouses category. That's a really key factor because I'm going to explain this in a minute, but we've kind of got a price floor built in simply because housing at some point, yes, we have a lot of investors, we have a lot of vacation home buyers, international buyers. Florida is the third most populous state. We have people who need a place to live. So at some point, no matter how bad things get, people are going to need somewhere to live. That's going to put a price floor on how bad things can get for us because housing remains a necessity for everyone. Whereas the time before, we had an infinite number of homes to choose from. There was nothing to stop prices from continuing to fall and fall and fall and fall. So that's really a built-in protection that we've got here is that the shortage, which has been such a hassle for us over the last couple of years, actually might save us to some degree. Active inventory of existing homes for sale, again, not much different than the numbers I showed you for the end of last year. Still dropping very quickly. Not dropping by as much at the end of March, and we'll kind of walk through that. It's just spreading around throughout all the counties as of the end of March. Oops, that's the wrong chart, first of all, because that should all look different, but I know that is the right chart. So some inventory is up in some places and not as much up in others. I think I've got the color on that wrong. I'll have to fix that. I think that's the wrong slide. Everything should have looked blue because we're dropping in inventory everywhere. Let me get into the short run outlook really quick. I already started to touch on this. Housing demand is temporarily suppressed for multiple reasons. There are the stay-at-home orders that are getting all of the media attention right now, and those are very important and are definitely keeping some activity from happening. Now, fortunately, in our state, partly through the work of our public policy team, Florida Realtors in Tallahassee, we are a essential service. We've been declared an essential service here in the state. There are other states like Michigan, I think Pennsylvania, where real estate is not considered essential, and getting any business done there has been twice as hard as it's been here, just simply because of that order. But even in the absence of the shutdown, people are going to be socially distancing. They are going to be afraid of getting sick. And everyone is uncertain about the future economy and housing market, including economists right now. On the supply side, we've also got a temporary suppression. And it's for the exact same 4 reasons as we have it for demand. We have people pulling back because of all of this. So people are afraid to maybe show their home to strangers right now. We definitely can't do open houses. We've got to adhere to the CDC guidelines responsibly. and represent our industry well. Again, we're doing some creative things. That's the great thing about realtors, is how entrepreneurial all of you are and resourceful. And I've talked to a lot of you one-on-one over the last 3 weeks, and it's really interesting to see how a lot of you are adapting to the situation. By itself, again, I touched on both demand and supply, going back to some Econ 101 here, essentially. By itself, falling demand, according to the law of demand, reduces the number of sales that we'll see, and it puts downward pressure on prices. So that's considering demand moving down or falling without considering what's happening on the supply side. That's kind of how economists treat supply and demand, is that we look at them in isolation. So everything else constant, demand, if it falls, always reduces transactions and puts downward pressure on prices. Right? Less people want to buy something, there's less people in the market, then there's less competition for a house, and there's less people there to buy one. At the same time, falling supply, independent of demand, falling supply reduces the number of sales. You have fewer homes on the market, or fewer people putting homes on the market, some people taking their homes off the market that were on already. That's going to be a reduction in sales as a result. But that puts upward pressure on prices, believe it or not. You still have a great number of people out there who need a home and want a home quite badly, and think this is just a temporary, hiccup in our economy that we will get through. Well, maybe not a hiccup, something more serious than that, but something we will get through in a year or so, max. So there are buyers out there, and if people are taking their homes off the market right now, that makes the homes that are left more scarce. So that scarcity actually would put upward pressure on prices. So this is actually a little bit outdated. This isn't really an outlook because we're actually already starting to see this. But the first thing we expected to see was a sharp drop in new pending sales, and that would last at least into May, and thereby causing a drop in closed sales that will lag by a month or two. And that's kind of what the data show. Here are new pending sales. These are the number of homes that went under contract in March in the MLSs as we track them for the state. And look at that, 2 really good months there, the 12% or more in January and February, and then in March, down 22.6% on the single family side, and down 35% compared to March of last year on the condo and townhouse side, which puts us at a net negative for the year for pending sales, for new pending sales. So kind of what we expected to see. I will say pretty much every week of March, we dug into the data a little bit deeper, just considering what was going on this month, and looked at it on a week-by-week basis. It was really bad from the outset in most areas, but it accelerated towards the end of the month. I think the last week of the month we were down maybe 50% year over year for the state. And that means there were some counties where that was even worse, closer to 70% fewer homes going under contract. And you can see in this chart the new pending sales by county. This is the change by county that we saw overall for the whole month. Again, not as bad in North Florida, at least extreme Northwest and Northeast Florida, only down by 3% in St. Johns County, for instance, and 7% in St. Lucie County, but everywhere else hit really hard in terms of contracts. So if your area seemed bad, you're not alone. Everyone is going through this. Every industry is going through this. You could compare us to some other industries. I'll show you some data from the restaurant industry, and we could actually count our blessings in one regard, at least. Not that it makes things any better for us, but short run outlook, again, continuing with that. The price impact, so we know sales are going to be down for a little bit. What about prices? Well, I showed you that there are countervailing forces at work here. The supply factors, the falling supply pushes prices up, but the falling demand is pushing them down. So it's going to depend which effect is stronger. If demand falls more than supply, prices are going to fall But again, that doesn't mean that supply isn't pushing them up, resisting that fall. So we think there could be some price fluctuation, but we don't think there's going to be significant price fluctuation in the short run in the next 2 to 3 months. One way that demand might fall faster than supply, and we might see a little bit of a reduction in prices, is for one thing, more buyers immediately exiting the market than sellers. As soon as we got through St. Patrick's Day, I think the public really took notice and started taking social distancing seriously. And people's, part of that being that their offices were starting to shut down or encourage telecommuting. And that really got a lot of people's attention. And I think buyers just immediately, you can stop buying or looking for a home whenever you want. So that's what happened first. Whereas there's more of a delay with sellers, especially those who are already listed. Some of them wanting to withdraw listings, some of them deciding to stay in, and some of those people also deciding to maybe cut prices. Maybe they were anxious to get their home off the market early ahead of all this and just get it out of the way now. But a lot of other people who might have decided to list, decided to hold back and wait and see what happens. But we think buyers reacted first, and that buyers reacted a little more strongly than they needed to. Sellers probably to a degree too, but everyone's starting to get used to the situation we're in and living like we're having to live right now. And I think that's actually allowed business to actually, not get back to where we were, but at least in part of mid-April to where we are now. I think the second half of April might actually be better than the first half of April. We're still going to see a drop, but it's not going to be a kind of drop. And over here, looking at new listings. New listings were not down very much for last month, but again, looking at the week-by-week data like we did, the last week of March, we were down almost 40% statewide in new listings. So kind of like I was saying, the sellers, reacting a little bit more slowly. We definitely saw that in the data, where we really saw, the first three weeks of March or so, it didn't look like anything was wrong. And then at the very end, then we saw a large uptick in withdrawn listings and a definite drop of year over year in new pending or new listings. So expect new listings for April to be down well into double digits, not quite as bad as new pending sales, but pretty close. Right now I would say it's going to be maybe new pending sales down 40 to 50%, but it's hard to say for sure until we get the final data in. Again, new listings, and we actually had some places in March where new listings were up for the month. But again, you don't know what part of the month most of those homes were listed, and we don't remove them from new listings if they get taken off immediately too. But definitely the north half of Florida a little bit more optimistic than the south half of Florida. Now remember, we didn't really see any localized countywide stay-at-home orders until very close to the end of the month, and our statewide order didn't come in until April 3rd. But the Miami-Dade one, which was the first one, was, I don't remember the exact date, but it was maybe at most a week before that one. The first state to actually do a statewide shutdown was California, and that was on March 18th, but it took a few more days before we had that many states doing it. California was quite early. So this is our world now, and as an economist who makes use of forecasting models and theories and whatnot, I'm on my computer a lot trying to figure out what's going to happen, and my computer doesn't work anymore. We don't have a model for this. We have never seen. I've gone back through all of the last 100 years past the Great Depression. We don't really have a situation like the one we're in right now at all. So none of our models really work here. My models can't take into account political decisions and when there's that many to make. we can model political factors when we don't have to model very many of them, but there are so many things up in the air, and these bills they're putting out are so comprehensive, there's no way to figure out how that's going to work. And on top of that, we're also, economists are not epidemiologists. I don't have an epidemiology model built into to my forecasting tools, but and I'm not an expert in that area, and I'd probably screw it up if I didn't spend a few years studying it. So relying a lot on epidemiologists and public health experts, and just following what's happening on the policy realm right now, that's really how we're getting by as economists. So that really handicaps me in terms of how I can assess our mid to long run outlook here. Can we pull off a V-shaped recovery? I've been saying this to give us all hope, but it just seems less hopeful as every week goes by here that we're going to have a true V-shaped recovery. The recovery really largely hinges on three factors. It's keeping our credit markets and financial system alive. That's like the beating heart and circulatory system of our economy. Credit markets need to stay moving. If we have a stoppage, a heart attack in that, then it brings down the whole economy. No matter how you feel about banks, they are a necessity for us. So we need to keep our financial markets moving. Keeping individuals and businesses afloat. This is something that we've seen a little bit different than how we reacted to the Great Recession. There was a political blowback of all those bailouts of large corporations and banks, and the little guy seemed to not get any attention. And this time, we're seeing them attempt to give individuals and small businesses a little bit more attention. I'll get into that a little bit. And the third prong, and arguably the most important one right now, is our public health policy, stopping the spread of the virus within the US. So I'll go a little bit more in detail into each of these, but our monetary policy response has been carried out by the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve came out with guns blazing. They dropped the funds rate to 0, which again helps all the other interest rates to fall to a lower level in a very generalized sense. So that's good. It made it cheap to borrow. They started buying bonds and stuff they don't normally buy, like mortgage-backed securities, which they had done in the Great Recession. A lot of the tools they're actually rolling out are tools that they used to great effect to combat the Great Recession. But the big difference now is that the Fed actually just did everything immediately, right off the top, instead of waiting, until things got worse. Most macroeconomists, those are people who study the large, broader economy, don't focus necessarily on specific industries or individual behavior. Macroeconomists generally think the Fed has struck mostly the right notes here. Financial system was in really good shape coming in, and that's very key, versus last time when it's actually what caused the downturn. The Fed response has been much quicker than last cycle, as I just mentioned. Also much quicker than in, we've heard some people bring out the D word, depression. I think it's way too early to do that, but comparing to the Great Depression, we are going to see a similar unemployment number, but the similarities kind of end there, at least for now. So we're going to see, people talking about there being a depression. Well, the Great Depression, there is no consensus among economists what really caused it entirely, but a large chunk of the economists agree, economic historians believe the Fed did a very poor job managing our way through that they didn't do enough and that they didn't act early enough. So what we're seeing this cycle with the Fed's behavior is really built on what we've observed in past cycles and what works and what doesn't. So I think it's impossible to say because there's so many intertwined parts and there's so many down the line secondary impacts of what they're doing that we might not be able to foresee, but it would be hard to recommend another course of action from what they took. So most people are pretty happy with what they've done. One side effect of this is that interest rates should be kept pretty low for the duration of this event, as long as the Fed is is buying bonds, pushing the Fed funds rate to zero. Almost all of their policies are going to keep interest rates low. The fiscal policy response are, Congress and working in conjunction with the White House to pass legislation. Well, wow, $2 trillion. Just to give you, it's so hard to conceptualize these big numbers in our brains. 2 billion looks like 2 trillion to me. My net worth will never be either of those numbers. So I don't really, but 2 trillion, just to think about, that is about 1/10 of our annual GDP. So all of the value and output that the United States produces each year, 2 trillion is about 1/10 of that. So roughly, a little over a month worth of GDP. So sounds like a big number, but what we're trying to do is keep our economy on life support while we figure out a way out of this. That was really the plan. It wasn't we're calling it a stimulus. It wasn't really a stimulus in the normal sense. We're not trying to say, hey, everyone go out and buy a car right now. We're just trying to make sure people are making their rent payments and mortgage payments to the best extent they can and meeting their other debt obligations so that our economy doesn't get backed up. So again, we'll need to see more than 2 trillion, and they've already started acting on that. But the initial wave of $2 trillion was eye-opening to a lot of people. That was a great signal for the market that Congress is willing to spend and do what it takes to allow us to do what we're doing right now, these stay-at-home orders for a couple of months. Checks for everyone and enhanced unemployment claims, as I know a lot of you are painfully aware right now of how that's going. Congress here gave you a bunch of hope, and then the implementation has been an asterisk. And help for small and large businesses, big signal, again, like I touched on, big signals that Congress is willing to spend further if need be, and they're doing that still. They're still living up to that mostly right now. The impact, as I said, good ideas, good thoughts. We wanted to get those checks out to everyone, but we didn't actually consider how do you actually do that in a short amount of time, considering we are using the IRS, kind of like reverse taxation. If you are in their database, then they get you a check pretty quick. Most people who file their taxes already have their money, but it's the people who needed it the most, the folks who didn't make enough money to actually need to file. It's taking a lot longer to get those to people. It's just kind of a price we pay. We expect freedom of privacy in our country, and don't want the government to have big databases on all of us. Well, as a result, it's hard for them to know who all of us are and get us all the checks we need at the same time. But the unemployment claims has been the unmitigated disaster. Well, there's out of many. Really need to iron that out ASAP. Again, we are, as your state association, I know for a fact that our leadership are on the administration's case daily on this. And yes, at some point there's really, our problem is that our unemployment claims infrastructure was just not up to snuff at all. It was one of the worst in the country. And when this became the designated way for us to get this done, there's not much. They're doing pretty much everything they can right now. It's just not going to be good enough for us. So again, I don't have that many of the details. I just know what I'm hearing from others, but as I'm not actively involved in doing that. But my heart goes out to all of you who are trying to get approved for the CARES Act supplemental claim funding and everything else. And we continue again to be on their case, and even though they say they're doing everything they can, we're going to keep telling them that there's more they can do if they put their minds to it. They've added something like 100 servers. They're doing a lot, but it's embarrassing for the state, and we can do better. Unintentional secondary effects need to be addressed. So in addition to not being able to distribute the money to people, we're having difficulties with the way, in one way, I guess we should let it slide. Congress acted pretty much faster than they ever do on anything to get this bill out. But when that happens and when everything is rushed, and even when it's not rushed up in Washington, there are always secondary effects with legislation that you don't foresee, unintentional things. One of them being that with the $600 a month supplemental unemployment claims, we have a lot of people from businesses who have been laid off or furloughed and who are getting this unemployment benefit. And in fact, in many cases are now earning more than they did actually in their actual job because of that bonus $600 that they're getting. That creates a problem because if we do have an area that can start getting back to work before that claim expires, and I think it expires at the end of July where you're getting the extra money, and that could still be extended, but they're going to need to iron something out because there's going to be restaurants opening and their people aren't going to want to come back because they can stay at home and make more money instead of going to work where they risk getting sick, among other things. And they have to work when you could sit at home watching Netflix or something. So something to keep an eye out for. There's going to be little kinks in the road like that. Taking a look at our employment picture, overall, employment by industry sector, professional and business services is our largest sector, but right behind that is leisure and hospitality at 14% of our workforce. And that's much larger than the national. If you look at the rest of the US without Florida, only 9% of non-Florida workers are leisure and hospitality. So this is not only our hotels, we've got restaurants in there and catering and all those kinds of businesses that drive our economy, the theme parks, the cruises. Those jobs are very much in danger. That sector is going to be hit hard. Sadly, that same sector was hit really hard last cycle. That's an unfortunate theme, is that retail and leisure and hospitality are the two that really got walloped last time, along with construction last time. Construction's not in that much danger this time. But retail and leisure and hospitality, those are the first jobs that we're going to start shedding, and it's already happening. You've probably seen the very large unemployment claims numbers across the country. So that's really where we're vulnerable. And what we need to try to do, and what Congress is trying to do, and the White House is trying to do, and our state government would like to do, is keep everyone, even though a lot of people have been furloughed or laid off, we want to do our best to keep people attached to their jobs, because that's the best way to get our economy back up and moving the way it was, is to get people back into the jobs they were already in and kind of just try to go back to some semblance of normalcy. The problem is that the longer it takes us to get the economy up and running again, the less likely we are to reattach a lot of those workers to their previous jobs. People are going to get new jobs that will require training, that will be expensive, but we might see an extended period of unemployment. So the biggest question really is, when is this shutdown going to end? Guidance keeps shifting further down the road. Every time they give it a date, they move it back. I don't know if that's because they just are overly optimistic or they're trying to manage our expectations. But at least right now, we actually see some states actually starting to open up, which I guess will be an interesting experiment for us to observe up in Georgia, for instance. We can see how that goes before we completely open up, although Governor DeSantis is scheduled to probably make some announcements here later this week, or at least they say he will be. So I imagine we'll probably just follow the roadmap the White House has put out. We've seemed to follow their roadmap, or implicitly so far all along, but that's kind of what I'm keeping my eye out for among other developments. I'm learning way too much about viruses and epidemiology, more than I ever thought I would. Although, every time we have a hurricane, I feel like I become a meteorologist for a couple of weeks. It's kind of the same deal. You've got to put on different hats when things like this happen. one point I do want to make, we've got lots of data coming in. I'm only going to give you one example of a data source here that really show that and underscore the point that the shutdowns themselves, they matter, but they don't matter as much as people think. Here's restaurant reservations made online, year-over-year change from the same day the previous year. From OpenTable, the company is part of Booking.com, where you can make your reservations online. A lot of restaurants use this. Looking at the 6 largest cities, I think these are by municipality because you've got Miami Beach and Miami, so it's not the metro area, it's the actual municipality. These are the 6 largest ones that where they do business, I assume. Generally, we've seen them all move in the same direction. With the early part of March, we saw somewhat lessened activity. There's that 10% of people who were freaking out about the stock market and were deciding not to go out to eat for the first 10 days of March. Then mid-March, that started to drop to more like 20%. They were finally convincing their friends, hey, this is serious. You shouldn't be going to restaurants. And it was right before March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, when the government ordered restaurants to close their dining areas off by 50%. So limit yourself to 50% capacity. Well, if you look at these data points on March 16th, we were pretty much in all of the 6 of these cities already at 45 to 55% lower attendance in restaurants to begin with. And by the time the governor shut down dining in restaurants completely, we were pretty much at zero, at almost 100% reduction already. So these shutdowns matter. There were a significant percentage of people who might have, 20% of people who might have continued to go to restaurants, that I guess you have to order a shutdown to impact their behavior, but most people were already social distancing. On the flip side, that's an implication for what we're going to see coming, because when we start to open the state back up and remove these legal barriers, you're still going to see a public that's going to be very wary and cautious, and it might be easier to do real estate and more people might want to go out and do real estate deals. The problem, though, is that for the rest of our economy, like our restaurants and everything else, it's going to be really hard. And that could cause long-run economic damage down here in Florida, especially where we're dependent on tourism and leisure and hospitality. And that could be really problematic for the market down the road, too. And yeah, just to look at, this is the same data, but by state. Here's Florida. So while we decreased, I just wanted to point out we did decrease a little bit more slowly than the other 9 largest U.S. states, but we got there. But my main point is that ending the economic shutdown, it doesn't really determine when our economy comes back. The virus does that. The bottom line is that people are going to need to feel safe for our economy to get back to where it was. And the only way that happens is if we can develop a vaccine, hopefully a year from now, or at least in the meantime, come up with therapeutic drugs, some therapeutic drugs that can at least, it might not be a vaccine, but you can be more certain that you're going to live through this thing, essentially. So again, until we feel safe, we're going to have depressed movement of people outside of the normal range of the economy. I see we only have 5 minutes left. I guess I talked too long. I would encourage you to go to sunstats.floridarealtors.org. This is our new tool for viewing our monthly data, and you can view any area in Florida that we track, which is all zip codes, counties, metro areas, municipalities, and the state. So you can enter anything in here and pull up those statistics. This is our dashboard where you get a big rundown of all of the main metrics that we track, many of which I talked about today. And there's explanations of each one. The
Dr.
chart builder.
O'Connor,
Yes.
is this, the SunStats, is there a tutorial on the state website for how to manipulate this program?
There isn't. We have a help section that's fairly robust, although it's just straight up reading. We had planned to shoot a tutorial video, but then we all went off site to work, and the rest is history. We were lucky to get this launched in late February. So
Okay, yeah.
But it's not, actually, once you play around with it a little bit, it's not really that hard to use. So, and we're always happy to answer questions. Nice thing is that for support too, is that you can call the tech helpline for support on this product too. So.
Yeah, and the tech helpline is really pretty terrific. If I may, because I know you have to jump off and go on to another meeting, do you have time for a couple of questions? Okay, great. Let me see here. Well, one of the questions, of course, for all of you listening, we will be having this recording on our Women's Council of Realtors Florida YouTube page, as well as our Facebook fan page. So you can go back and review that. There was a question about whether they could get the PowerPoint presentation that you were using. Maybe that is a link that you could share with us, and we can then put that up as well.
I can pass that along to you.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. One question is, what would you say to buyers saying that they are postponing buying a home since they believe prices will go down due to economy and coronavirus situation?
Well, I mean, there's really no reason to think that they're going to go down, because this is a completely different situation than we saw last time. It all comes back to how much housing supply we have. And again, that's where people see how prices have gone up and they just automatically think it's the same as last time. But that's not the case at all. We just definitely do not have enough housing to go around for the way our population is growing. That's really what is going to hold our value. And again, aside from the Great Recession, which wasn't a normal recession, it was a financial apocalypse, right? We don't normally have all of the big banks in the country melting down during a recession. If you look at data from past recessions beyond the Great Recession, like in the early 2000s and early 90s, housing actually came out really well. There was no massive price reduction. Sales were depressed for a little while, but prices actually came out higher than they did going in some cases. So you've got to look further back in history than the last cycle, even though that last cycle is still seared in all of our brains.
Another question. In New York City, there are approximately 11,000 people living within 1 square mile. With so many people able to work from home now, do you see a mass exit to buying a home in Florida?
I think, I've heard anecdotal evidence that that's already happening with some folks who can afford to move right now on that. But we'll wait and see. That is, I think, more broadly, not just because of the virus, but because people have figured out how easy it is to work from home, and the folks that they never thought would actually figure out how to get Zoom to work are able to use it, and everyone's on board by now. So that definitely could have an impact. That would allow people to have to come into the office at least fewer times a week, maybe, or that could be transformative. It's definitely gonna be transformative on the commercial side.
Yes, exactly.
But even residentially, you can build homes further from the jobs and things like that. So that will be less impactful. Well,
let me see. I think that might be all of our questions. Okay, it looks as though it is. Dr. O'Connor, thank you so much for your time and for all of this information. It's a lot to absorb. And as you said, it seems to be ever changing from week to week. But what I've gotten out of this is really the importance. Of course, stay at home. Stay at home, guys. And the other thing is really keeping an eye on what's going on with the financial situation, more than the housing, because we are an effect of that.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. I really appreciate this. Who knows? Maybe we'll have you back on a month from now. But anyway, thank you, everybody. Yes, I'm sorry.
I said I plan to be around. So yes, if you guys want to have me back on, I'm always happy to do it.
That's wonderful. Thank you, everybody, for chiming in here and for participating. Again, this recording will be on our YouTube channel as well as our Facebook fan page. If you are not already a fan, please follow and like us, and we will be bringing you information like this and more. So thank you so much, everybody, and that is all we have for you.
All right, take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.